Hi everyone, welcome to this second video on lesson 9 of the Earth and Climate scheme of work on formation of fossil fuels. In the previous video I was just showing how I would introduce the carbon cycle to students, and that's really important. So before we start, and I won't go over this in loads of detail, but it's really important that you give them the whole picture and then tell them that in this lesson we're going to zoom in on what's going on here. How does carbon get locked underground when animals die and decompose? So we're going to tell a simple story about how fossil fuels are formed. This is not going to be loads and loads of detail. And one thing that we can do during this lesson is kind of draw students' attention to some of the similarities between things they learned about in those lessons on the rock cycle. In particular, the formation of sedimentary rocks and the formation of metamorphic rocks. So what we can do to begin with, and I might even do this in blue, is show the ocean. So, and the way I'm going to draw this, because ultimately what I want students to do by the end of this lesson is just be able to describe how fossil fuels are formed. So the way I'm going to lay out my diagrams, in essence, is sequential. So I'm just going to tell them a story. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. That's absolutely fine. So I'm going to draw the ocean here and say, well, we've got lots of fish in the ocean. So I'm just going to do some very rudimentary fish like this. Whoops. Nothing very exciting, so I'll do a couple of fish like this. My fish are not very good, but that doesn't really matter. Hopefully students will recognise what they are. Maybe I'll do a couple of blue fish as well. Like that. So we've got some fish in the ocean swimming around. If you want, you can add some other marine life. It depends how confident a drawer you are. But what we want to emphasise is that at some point these fish will die. And if these fish die, then what happens is they end up sinking to the bottom of the ocean. So I might just put, I'll try and do a kind of flattened fish here like this. This is a dead fish that's sunk to the bottom of the ocean. So I might label this as dead sea creatures. That's not creatures in the Dead Sea, that's sea creatures that are dead. So we've got dead sea creatures. Now what we want to then do is say what happens over time. So I'm going to draw a little arrow like this. And over time what starts to happen is, if this is the surface of the ocean, again, just draw it like this, if that's the surface of the ocean, what starts to happen is, and I'm going to try and draw this aligned with the one that I did before, but what we get is these kind of layers of dead material, the remains of sea creatures building up. And I might sort of contrast the colours here just to really illustrate those layers. But the main thing that you want students to recognise is that the main constituent of these layers is carbon. So carbon that was present in the bodies of these sea creatures. So I'll just add something here about layers building up. And again, you don't need necessarily to add a label to this. And we should show as well that this process was continuing. So the reason the layers build up is because there's more fish floating about in the ocean. Dear me, my fish are not very good at all. I need to practice. So I'll do some more like this. And these continue to die, and they continue to end up on the bottom of the ocean. Now, what we can then do, well, first actually we should compare that. So they should start to notice this is quite similar to how sedimentary rocks were formed. So you have this process of sedimentation, things building up on the bottom of the ocean. Then there's this compression and compaction, and ultimately the cementation that sticks them all together. But what we get with the formation of fossil fuels is, if enough layers build up, then because of, firstly, let's add some force arrows, and this is something they've learned about relatively recently in year 8. So we've got some force arrows like this pushing down, and I might just add a label here to say that these force arrows represent pressure. So you've got intense pressure from the layers building up above. And you've also got And again, this is something that they've just learned about when they were doing the rock cycle. The fact that you've got these outer and inner cores that are really hot. We don't need to tell them why, but they're really hot because of these radioactive processes. So we've got intense heat coming from below, so I might add a layer here like this. Then what starts to happen is, if I do my final arrow and my final diagram, let's draw something like this, is that underneath the ocean, if I draw something like this, then what you get is these kind of stores built up. I'll draw this at the same sort of place. Stores built up of a new material. So the intense heat and pressure actually change the constituents of these layers. There's a chemical change takes place, and we get these kind of reservoirs of fossil fuels. Now I'm going to draw oil here. You could also leave a kind of cavity and shade that to show that it's full of natural gas. You could talk about coal as well. I mean, coal comes from plants rather than sea creatures, but you can tell students that it's a similar process. But then we should show that there's still the layers there, like this. So we've still got the layers like as follows. So I might just to, they're not really red. Red might be a bit misleading. I'm just trying to show this idea that there are layers building up. So I'm just going to do some layers like that. And what you can do is say, if we do, let's do a few more, like a thicker layer like that. And I can do something along the top there. Something like that, that we get these regions in here where you had a chemical change. So we can say crude oil forms, I'll just put oil, natural gas, and you might mention coal and say it's a similar process, just with the remains of plants. And then we could say, well, and this carries on happening. So we can still draw our creatures in here like this. This is an ongoing process, but there's a caveat here, and this obviously will become important later on. The caveat here is that this process takes millions of years. So you might want to label that. We could add a label up here maybe. I mean, the whole process takes millions of years, but I'll add it up here. But it takes millions of years for that intense heat and pressure to change the chemical composition of what's being stored up in these layers and form these really rich hydrocarbons full of carbon and hydrogen. And that's worth emphasizing to students, because that's going to be a really important point later on when we start looking at different energy resources and making those comparisons. So that's a really quick overview. Now what we are going to want them to do by the end of this lesson is turn this little cartoon strip into a full paragraph where they can fluently describe the process by which fossil fuels are formed. So it's a really simple overview, this one. And I suppose the important points I would make, just as a reminder, relate this back to things that they already know. So you can compare this stage of the process to what happens in the formation of sedimentary rocks. It's this kind of build-up of layers at the bottom of the ocean and the compaction, the pressure coming down from above. This one is a bit more like metamorphic rocks, where that intense heat and pressure changes the chemical structure of the material and forms something new. And in this case, what we get is the three fossil fuels, and we want the students to go away knowing what the three fossil fuels are at the end of this lesson. They are oil, natural gas, and coal. In the next lesson, we will look at what we use these fossil fuels for.